one of the most important skills that you need to learn in chemistry is to write formulas for compounds. Now, formulas of compounds should indicate the number of atoms of each kind in what's called a formula unit of the compound. So let's define what a formula unit is. Well, if you have a molecular compound, the formula unit is just the molecule. Okay? If you have an ionic compound, okay, the formula unit for an ionic compound is the simplest set of cations and anions with a total charge of 0. So the formula for an ionic compound should reflect what its formula unit is, what the simplest set of cations and anions are that would have a total charge of 0. So let's illustrate that. How many atoms are in one formula unit of propanoic acid, which is the formula CH3CH2COOH? Well, what's the formula unit for this compound? What type of compound is this? Ionic or molecular? So this must be the formula for a molecule, right? So this is the formula of the molecule. That's a formula for a molecular compound. So how many H's are in one formula unit? Now, in other words, how many in one molecule? There's 3 there, there's 2 there, and there's 1 there. So you have 6 hydrogens atoms in one formula unit of this compound. One formula unit of this compound is called a molecule. It's a molecular compound. Let's look at this. What is the formula unit for a compound made up of calcium ions and nitride ions? So the cations will have a +2 charge. The anions have a -3 charge. Well, what's the simplest combinations of +2s and -3s that would add up to 0? You have a +2, 1 of each. That's not going to add up to 0, right? How about 2 of each? 2 and 1. 2 cations, 1 anion. That's still not going to add up to 0, right? Well, 2 anions and 2 cations, that's +4 -6. That's still not going to add up to 0, right? Another cation, you have 3 of the +2s, so you have 3 of those, 3 cations and 2 anions. This will give you +6. 3 cations would give you +6. 2 anions would give you -6. So the simplest set of ions that will have a total charge of 0 would be 3 cations, right? And 2 anions. So the cation in this case happens to be calcium with a charge of +2. The anion, you remember the name of nitrogen with a -3 charge? Nitride. Yeah, so you have 2 of the nitride ions. That's the formula unit for this compound. So that should be reflected in the formula of the compound. So when you write the formula for calcium nitride, then you should say, the way you would do it is you would say calcium ions, there's 3 of them, and nitride ions, there's 2 of them. So you use subscripts to indicate how many of each ion you have in the formula unit. But when you put the formulas together to form the formula of the compound, you omit the charge. Okay? So, formula of a molecular compound, like I said, will just be the formula of the molecules of that compound because the formula unit is the molecule. So let's look at this example right here. What's the formula of a molecular compound given the ball and stick representations of the molecule below? And down here. In the picture, the blue spheres represent carbon atoms. So that's carbon, that looks more green to me. The white spheres are hydrogen. So that's a hydrogen, 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 and that's a hydrogen. And the red sphere is an oxygen. So what would be the formula of the molecular compound made up of these molecules? So C2, 2 carbons, 6 hydrogens, and O. Okay, sometimes you can write, oftentimes people would write this as CH3, CH2OH because this grouping is quite common among molecules, okay? And that's a very common grouping also, so that's a CH2 and there's your OH right there. In fact, these molecules make up the compound known as ethanol, ethyl alcohol. That's the thing that makes you drunk in your beverages. Okay. So how do you write the formula for an ionic compound? Like I said, you write the formula of the cation, you omit the charge. You write the formula of the anion, you omit the charge. And then you write subscripts to indicate how many cations and anions are in one formula unit. Now, if your subscript happens to be 1, then you don't write it. Okay, so a missing subscript is implied to be 1. And if you have a polyatomic ion, and it has a subscript greater than 1, make sure you enclose the entire formula for the polyatomic ion in parentheses before you put the subscript. Okay, so let's illustrate that with these examples. What's the formula of an ionic compound consisting of calcium and chloride ions? Okay, what's the formula it's going to be? Okay, you're going to need 2 chlorides, right? 2 times negative 1s, 2 of the negative 1s, 1 of the plus 2, right? To have a total charge of 0. A plus 2 and 2 negative 1s. So the formula for this compound is CaCl2. Correct answer here is C. Let's look at this one. That's a formula for a compound consisting of calcium and carbonate ions. Calcium is plus 2, carbonate is negative 2. How many plus 2's and how many negative 2's do you need? There's the smallest set of plus 2's and negative 2's that would add up to 0. 1 of each, right? 1 of this and 1 of that. So the formula of calcium carbonate, compound made up of calcium and carbonate ions, which incidentally you've seen a lot already. It's calcium carbonate is chalk. Okay, so that's CaCO3. That's also limestone. Okay. So how would you read the formula of an ionic compound? All you have to do, so if I gave you the formula of an ionic compound, okay, and you should be able to recognize it's ionic, right? What do you look for? A metal or ammonium, right? Or which is NH4. Well, all you have to do if I gave you the formula to be able to read it back to me, you have to just simply name the cation and then name the anion. Simple as that. Now, so you have to review your names and symbols and formulas for your monatomic ions and polyatomic ions so you know what those are. Okay. So for example, CaCl2, you recognize this as ionic because calcium is a metal, right? So you have to know calcium is, well, Ca is calcium ion. What's the anion here? Calcium, you know, is plus 2, right? And the monatomic ion with chlorine in it is chloride. So you have to remember that from your lesson on monatomic ions. And that's why this formula is CaCl2, because calcium is plus 2, chloride is negative 1. So the charges, okay, they're not explicitly written here because you're expected to know what those charges are. You're expected to be able to figure out what those charges are. So the cation is called calcium. The anion is called chloride. So the name of this compound is simply calcium chloride. Okay? How about this one? You should be able to recognize that this is cobalt. So that's a cation. That's a metal cation. And then you should be able to recognize that NO3. So this one says you have 2 of the NO3 ions. NO3, okay, if you look at your list of polyatomic ions, you'll see NO3 with a negative 1 is called nitrate. So this is cobalt nitrate, but you know that cobalt is a transition metal, so it can have variable charge. You have to figure out what is the charge of cobalt here. For cobalt, well, nitrate is negative 1, right? Cobalt, what's the charge of cobalt going to be? If you have 2 of the nitrates, well, 2 of the nitrates, right? CONO3, 2. You have, this is negative 1, you have 2 of those, so the cobalt itself must be plus 2. So you would name this cobalt Roman numeral 2 nitrate. So the name of this compound is cobalt Roman numeral 2 nitrate. Okay? how do you write formulas of an ionic compound? If I gave you the name of an ionic compound, you should be able to tell me that it is ionic just based on the name, right? You look for a metal in the first name, first part of the name, or ammonium. Then, so you should be able to identify what the cation and the anion is. The first word is going to be the cation. The second word, the rest of it would be the anion. Now, what you do is you figure out the subscripts based on the charges of the ions. And then you put the formulas of the ions together, exclude the charge, and then put the appropriate subscripts. And like I said, if the subscript is larger than 1 for a polyatomic ion, you have to enclose it in parentheses. So let's look at ammonium sulfate. I gave you this name, okay? So you should say, okay, ammonium, that should be ionic. So the ammonium should be NH4 plus, okay? How do you figure it out? You don't. You just know that ammonium is NH4 plus. One of those things we call trivial, okay? And sulfate, well, you look up your list of polyatomic ions, and you can find that sulfate is SO4 with a -2 charge. So you need to be familiar with the names and formulas of the common monatomic ions and the common polyatomic ions. Well, these are the formulas of the ions, so what would be the formula of the compound? How many +1s and -2s do I need in order to have a zero total charge? Okay, I'm going to need, this is +1, right? I'm going to need 2 of those, and I'm going to need 1 of that. Okay, a +1, 2 +1s, and a -2 add up to 0. So the formula then would be 2 of the NH4s. So I put the NH4 in parentheses and write a 2 outside. And I need 1 sulfate, so SO4. I don't put it in parentheses and put a 1 outside because we don't write 1s. Okay, so this is the formula for ammonium sulfate.